Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Network Management Megatrends 2020. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Seamus McGillicuddy, VP of Research covering Network Management at EMA. Seamus has more than 12 years of experience in the IT industry as an industry analyst and journalist. At EMA, he is the Vice President for the Network Management practice. And before I hand things over to Seamus, I wanted today's audience to know that we will be taking questions at the conclusion of today's event. You can log them by using the Q&A functionality. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA later today with the on-demand playback, as well as additional information on this new research report. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Seamus McGillicuddy. Seamus.
Thank you, Raleigh, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm going to be talking about some new research that I conducted this spring on network management megatrends. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge and thank the 7 sponsors of this research. This is an independent research study, but it can't happen without the financial support of our partners in the vendor community. So I'd like to thank SDN, network performance management vendor, AppCon, which is a provider of visibility infrastructure, Blue Cat, which offers solutions for core network services like DNS, DHCP, and IP address management, Kentic, a network analytics vendor, and could be classified as a network performance management vendor, and then Petzler, who provides PRTG network monitor, a network infrastructure monitoring vendor, Progress, formerly known as Ipswitch, which provides What's Up Gold, another network infrastructure monitoring vendor, and then Sev1, which has provides a network performance management platform as well. So all of these vendors are very relevant to this research, and that was what drove their interest. And so thank you again. So I'm just going to present a quick agenda so you can see where we're going to go with this. I've talked briefly about research goals and methodology. Then I'm going to talk about the factors that go into enterprise network operations success and failure at a very high level. There's a lot of data in the research on that topic, but I picked out a few data points to just show you where enterprises are today. Then we'll take a look at the network management tool set that enterprises are using today. And then we'll look at some of the megatrends in this research. First one, we'll look at the term that I think I coined a couple years ago, NetSecOps, which talks about how network teams and security teams are increasing their partnerships in the enterprise. Megatrend number 2 would be looking at data center SDN, so-called SDN, and its impacts on network management. The third one on IoT devices connecting to the corporate network and how that drives partnerships between NetOps and operational technology groups. And finally, number 4 megatrend will be streaming network telemetry and how it's poised to enrich the monitoring world. So first, research goals and methodology. This is a biennial study, meaning we do this megatrends research every 2 years. The first one was in 2008. And that allows us to benchmark certain things in the world of network management. And a lot of the questions we've been asking over and over again every 2 years, they've evolved, obviously, as technology evolves. But we look at technical tool requirements, business requirements, and procurement strategy, and how network teams organize themselves into things like a network operations center or a cross-domain ops team, the challenges that these teams encounter when trying to support their networks, and what sort of business outcomes you can expect from a network management strategy. And then we look at so-called megatrends, how certain trends we're seeing in technology and business are driving change in the network management function. We've looked at, these tend to change from year to year or repeat. For instance, last year and this year, we looked at the topic of NetSecOps, things like how's the cloud impacting network management, IoT, and other emerging technology. So this is really sort of a benchmark of the network management world. That's the way I look at this research. It really is my flagship research project, and I look forward to coming back to it every 2 years and looking at how things have changed. In terms of the methodology, this is based on a survey of 350 enterprise IT professionals who had to answer a few qualifying questions to make sure that we're targeting the right people. They had to be directly engaged with the networks in the organization, not just like familiar with it or familiar with networking technology, but actually hands-on engagement. They had to be involved in the purchase, implementation, and or use of network management products. And they also had to be subject matter experts or middle management. We didn't want people who are up in the CIO's office and don't really do much other than review budgets and provide general direction. We wanted people who were either leading network teams directly or hands-on with network technology. And this is an overview of the demographics. Like I said, job titles, 50% were middle management, managers, supervisors, directors, VPs. The other 50% were admins, engineers, architects, operations staff, or the technical business analysts. We had a nice mix of size of company. 9% were from very large enterprises, 10,000 or more. A third were mid-size, that's 250 to under 1,000 global employees. And then the bulk of them were in that sort of large middle area, large enterprise, 1,000 to just under 10,000 global employees. We also got data on the size of our networks. So you see 27% had networks with 2,500 or more network devices. That's not devices, but network devices. So switches, routers, load balancers, firewalls, things that are nodes on the network, not the endpoints. And then in terms of geography, we wanted a transatlantic view like we do every year. So 77% from North America, a little less than a quarter were from the 3 largest economies in Europe, UK, France, and Germany. And then there are about 20 verticals captured in the survey. We didn't target any specifically. We excluded certain verticals like value-added resellers and channel partners of technology vendors and cloud providers and communication service providers, just because their networking world is a lot different from the typical enterprise, and we wanted to focus on enterprise. So let's look at NetOps success and failure. So we always ask this question, would you please rate your success as a network operations function in your enterprise? How do you feel about it? These people almost never give themselves a failing grade. As you can see here, 1% said they're somewhat unsuccessful, and 0% said unsuccessful, unqualified, unsuccessful. They usually admit, though, that they see room for improvement. And here it jumps out at you. 60% of these guys or gals said that they see room for improvement. They're somewhat successful, but only 35% say definitely a success. And that allows us to, cross-correlate with other questions to see what indicators of best practices we see. But the big takeaway here is a little over a third feel that they're doing everything they need to support the network and keep it up and running and high performing and deliver things that the enterprise needs on its network. We always ask, what are your top challenges to success? And here you see the top 2 are budget and a shortage of skilled personnel, networking people. In 2018, when we asked the same question, the shortage of personnel was number 1. Budget was at the bottom of the list. Instead, tied at number 1 with shortage of skilled personnel was a lack of end-to-end network visibility. That lack of end-to-end visibility disappeared this year. It was near the bottom of the list this year to the extent that it's not even on this screen. It didn't make the top 7. So it seems that end-to-end network visibility is less of a challenge these days, and we'll look at some of the reasons why in a second. You also see poor infrastructure implementation is at the top, number 3 here. In past years, that was also very low. I think that's indicative of the fact that a lot of people have been doing some network transformation projects in recent years, like maybe they're implementing a new network fabric in their data center, they're doing an SD-WAN, software-defined WAN overlay, or maybe they're doing some cloud networking stuff, building a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud network architectures, and that's where some failures hit home and drive some challenges to network operations. And then you see ineffective network management outsourcing is also here. We always ask them if you're outsourcing anything, and if you look at the full report, you can see some data on what's being outsourced and how. But I didn't cover it in this because there's just too much ground to cover. And you see undefined processes is also a challenge here. And when we look at NetSecOps, that will pop up a little bit. We always ask them to tell us what percentage of IT service problems are experienced and reported to the help desk by end users before the network operations team can proactively detect them. And that average response has hovered at 40% for the better part of a decade, 40.3% in 2014. You see it's declined slightly, but not in a statistically significant way over the past 6 years until this year, when it suddenly dropped to a third. So the proactive problem detection has improved in the network operations space, which is really good news. That means that fewer end users are being impacted by IT service problems, less productivity lost, fewer business transactions being interrupted. It's really good, and this is something that we'll examine a little bit here, and in the full report you can see some other analysis of it. But it's really exciting to see that change. Then we took a deep dive into some network operations processes, and on the left you see how a network manager's day usually plays out. In the blue, they spend most of the time on reactive troubleshooting, so there's still firefighters. More than about 3/10 of the day is spent putting out fires, and then a little less time spent on proactive problem prevention, typically, which is in the greens. You'd love to see the green bigger than the blue, but the bottom line is more than half of their day is spent fixing things or looking for things to fix. And then in the orange, a little over a quarter of their day is spent on strategic projects. That one you'd love to see is the biggest one, but here it's the third highest amount of time spent, which is unfortunate. And then blue is all other tasks. I'm sorry, purple, all other tasks is the small one. That one you'd love to see at 5%. Ideally, that's time spent on email. It's time spent in meetings. But it should be as small as possible. But the good news is, they are carving out some time for strategic projects. It should be bigger, but it's not terrible. 42.7% of all network monitoring tool alerts are not actionable. This is a question where we ask them to tell us, how efficient your network monitoring tools are, pointing to things that are actually in need of repair, and that's a really high number. At least it's not a majority of them, but it should be much lower. That means that they're spending a lot of time trying to isolate problems and determine whether or not the problems are real or just thresholds that aren't necessarily a fire in need of water. But that's indicative of people having really inefficient tools. Part of it might be they have too many tools, and we'll look at that in a second. We also asked this question: tell us which troubleshooting tasks are the least supported, the most poorly supported by your network management tool set. So this, you see the top two responses: root cause analysis and problem identification and isolation were the most poorly supported. That is a huge problem because those are the most critical tasks, in my opinion, to figure out where the problem is, what it is, and then how to fix it, or what's causing it. And then the ones that are best supported were things like implementing remediation or verifying that remediation worked. Those things network management tools or network monitoring tools are really good at, but actually analyzing the problem is not well supported by the workflows and the presentations and your dashboards and your drill downs and so forth. And so network management vendors need to improve in that area. You also see documenting findings is pretty low, or poorly supported as well. So, after fixing something, documenting it so that, future generations can reference the tool and understand whether or not, there's some runbook automation or something that they can just implement to correct the problem. I think AI ops technologies that a lot of network vendors are starting to invest in could remediate that and sort of remove the need for documenting findings, because the tools will become smart enough that it just remembers things. Then we also asked enterprises to think about, these research respondents, to think about their three most recent complex IT service problems that required collaboration across IT domains. You know, the sort of war room response team where all the finger pointing happens. We asked them in those events, the most three recent ones, what were the root causes? Where were the root causes? Network infrastructure is at the top, and when we asked this question in previous years, it's been the same response. Here you see a client error, user error, or client device failure was number 2. In previous years, that's been like towards the bottom of the list, so that's gone up a little bit, which may have something to do with the increased proliferation of things like BYOD and the Internet of Things and remote users, especially right now. Oh, I should mention, this survey was done late February, early March, which, as all of you know, was a different, more innocent time where we weren't all hiding in our houses and afraid to go to the grocery store. The world has changed a lot, but I think the network has been the glue that's held us all together, and if anything, networking has become more important, obviously, since this survey was done. So some of the responses in this research reflect a pre-pandemic world. And so I just want to make a mention of that here. In future research projects, obviously, I'm working on two right now. I'm going to obviously uncover things on how the pandemic has affected the network. But for things like the tools they're using and the processes they have, I don't think a lot has changed. I think that they might start investing in new tools, but I think a lot of this data is still indicative of the way the world works for the networking function in an enterprise, with some obvious caveats like the increase in remote users. But anyway, client device or user error, number 2. That might be even up to number 1 right now with the pandemic. Who knows? And then security systems like firewall blocking legitimate traffic, or an inline security appliance crashing. That's the number 3 root cause. And then number 4, tied at 3 actually, security incident. So a breach is causing a service problem, and that is those latter 2 responses here are, I think, one of the key reasons why network teams and security teams are collaborating more, because at least from my perspective as someone who researches the network management world, a lot of the time when a NetOps team is responding to an IT service performance issue, what they're troubleshooting is actually a security problem, a breach or a firewall failure, or something that the security teams has dominion over. And that just right there is the reason why these teams need to be coming more close together, and we're going to explore that shortly. The network management tool set. This question we've been asking for 12 years. How many tools does your enterprise use to monitor and troubleshoot its network? This question has plagued me for years. Why are some people using so many tools? The typical enterprise, as you can see, the blue is 2020, the green is 2018, just so we can, the thing I like to say, the takeaway here is that they're seeing signs of consolidation. The green bar is shrinking on the right, and the bars on the right are shrinking from green to blue. You see fewer people using more than 25 tools, fewer people using more than 21 tools, fewer people using more than 16 tools, and so on and so on. And the amount of people who are using just 4 to 5 tools, who've consolidated down to 4 or 5 tools, you can look at it that way, has exploded. And that is good news. People are reducing the amount of point tools, discrete, independent, siloed tools, freeware, open source, unsupported tools and are consolidating onto a smaller number of tools that are more multifunction, more integrated. And I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen some improvement in areas like proactive problem detection and not relying on the end user complaint to tip you off to an emergency. Good news there. Consolidation is happening, but there's still people out there who are using more than 25 tools, or 16 to 20. It's too high. I just think back to like 3 years ago when I was talking to one guy in a network engineering department. He said between his network engineering team and the NOC, the independent NOC, there are 75 tools that they use to monitor and troubleshoot their network. 75 tools. I mean, just logging into each of those can take up your whole day. Another important thing we see here is the emergence of the public cloud impacting the network management world. This is not a surprise. 6 years ago, when I would ask network management vendors, network monitoring vendors, what are you doing to provide visibility into the public cloud? At least half the time, they were saying, we aren't doing anything because our customers aren't asking for it. Were you asking for it 6 years ago? Maybe not, but I guarantee you are now. And those vendors that weren't doing anything 6 years ago are playing catch up. And I was always astonished when they told me that. Like, everyone's got something going on in AWS. So you don't have anything to connect your world and the on-prem, the world of the on-prem network that you monitor with what might be happening out in the cloud. No one's got their head in the sand now, and you see it reflected in the data that enterprises collect and use to monitor their networks, and operational monitoring, capacity management, and troubleshooting. Every 2 years, we ask them, what data are you using to support these tasks? Operational monitoring, capacity management, troubleshooting. And these aren't really adoption figures. They're what's top of mind. You think about it, we give them this long list of data types like packets, flows, raw packets, packet metadata, flows, configuration files, logs, SNMP metrics, all that stuff. They go through the list and they tick the ones like, yeah, these are the ones that I'm really thinking on right now. So the ones that float at the top of the list are usually indicative of what's hot right now. Like in 2014, it was all about sys logs. 2016 was all about NetFlow and IPsec. 2020, management system APIs and synthetic active monitoring were high on the list. This year, it's cloud provider flow logs, like AWS VPC flow logs, for instance. Like, everyone is focused on that from an operational monitoring perspective to capacity management and troubleshooting at the top of the list. Also, management system APIs are everywhere. You see those are the top three everywhere. And then device logs have risen back up as top of mind this year, as opposed to, so like 2014, logs peaked and then fell by the wayside. Now people are thinking about it again. So that's something to keep in mind. And then the operational monitoring side, people are also pretty focused on DNS queries and response logs. That will also that will also support NetSecOps, which we'll look at in a second. So management tool requirements. We looked at business requirements. We looked at functional requirements from a product feature perspective. And you see here, the big one is a flexible deployment model. People are looking for flexibility in, I want to deploy this on-prem as a VM or as an appliance. No, I want to deploy it as a SaaS offering, or maybe I want to manage service for my tool. That's top of mind right now, as well as resiliency. The tool that monitors whether my network is resilient must also be resilient. And then ease of use and low maintenance costs round out the top four. And then product features, people are really looking for network mapping and visualization, so good topology maps, drill downs into live data, mapping that shows data overlaid on it to tell you, these are the links that are in trouble, things like that. That's really important. And then integrated security insights. Again, NetSecOps, which we'll touch on shortly. Customizable reporting is important. Collaboration tools and workflows integrated into the tool is important. And then APIs for integration with other tools, which kind of harkens back to the management system APIs being an important source of data for operational monitoring and so forth. You want to be able to pull in things like alerts from the SIM or tickets from the ITSM platform. Briefly, packet-based monitoring is pretty important, even though some people are saying the rise of cloud has reduced its relevance. It's still important from an operational perspective and from a security perspective. 46% of enterprises said they are using network packet brokers to aggregate data from mirrored ports. So that's a lot of packet-based monitoring going on in the enterprise space. And then you think about all the ones that are plugging, that are just relying on, directly plugging into taps and span ports. So it's even higher than that. And then 26% of enterprises said that one of the most valuable network performance monitoring features is packet monitoring and analysis. That made the top of their list for 26% of the enterprises. So packet analytics remains important. You may have some limitations on what you can do there in the cloud, but there's still a lot of ability to gather packet data or packet metadata from the public cloud and correlate that with the packet analysis you're doing in other parts of your on-prem infrastructure. And it can give you a lot of granular visibility into end-user experience and application performance. So it's important to keep that in mind for your overall network management strategy. We also we asked a bunch of questions on DDI management too. That's DNS, DHCP, and IP address management. 51% of enterprises said they're using commercial tools to manage this, which is good because a lot of people rely on, in the past have relied too much on open source tools and spreadsheets and things like that, and that's not good in a world where the infrastructure has become more dynamic and multi-cloud. 25% said that their commercial solution is a unified DDI management solution that manages DNS, DHCP, and IP address management in one system as opposed to discrete systems, which is also good. It should be higher. We asked them a bunch of other questions. One highlight here, critical DDI capabilities. High performance DNS, DHCP infrastructure is at the top of the list. Security insights and protection, so like a DNS firewall or something like that is also important. Public cloud support obviously is important. Integration with IT orchestration or cloud orchestration is number 4. So those are the 4 critical DDI capabilities right now. So moving on to the megatrends, the NetSecOps one, which is the one I think is the most exciting maybe. Some might disagree, but just we looked at this in 2018 too, and we took a deeper look in 2020, the partnerships that we see evolving, emerging in this world. First, we asked them, how would you describe the collaboration that goes on between the networking operations function and the security ops function in your enterprise space? And 37% claim to have completely unified those groups, which seems pretty high, but 2 factors that are driving that is, one, the mid-market companies were really likely to do this, and that kind of the larger enterprises not so much. Also, not reflected here on this slide, this was very common in Europe. More than 50% of European respondents said that they had fully unified teams. North America, much less likely. 26% said they had separate teams with integrated tools and shared processes. So those are groups that have formalized their partnerships between discrete groups. Then you see 29% said, we're doing ad hoc collaboration. No, they haven't really formalized anything. And then 7% said that they saw no or very little collaboration between these 2 groups. So 93% have some significant collaboration, and more than half of them have formalized it in some way. You see those that have the unified teams are more likely to tell us that they are successful with network operations. Those that have ad hoc approaches to collaboration are more likely to tell us that they are less successful in network operations as a function within the enterprise. And that can tell you, that is indicative of a potential best practice to unify these teams if possible. If not, formalize that collaboration as much as possible. So we asked them, why do you collaborate and where? So goals for NetSecOps, these are the top 4. Number 1, they're trying to improve network performance. We mentioned earlier that security incidents and security system failure or misconfiguration and so forth can lead to something that presents itself as an IT service problem. And by collaborating more closely with SecOps, you can more intelligently, more efficiently respond to and mitigate those issues when the 2 teams are working closely together. They can detect the problem earlier, maybe proactively, and ensure that the network remains high performing and provides a good experience to users. Risk reduction number 2. So from the security team's perspective, they see an opportunity to reduce risk. I mean, if they haven't detected a problem, a breach, but the network team is seeing something security related manifest itself as a network performance problem, wouldn't it be good if those 2 teams were closer together so that you can respond to that security incident quicker with a unified tool? That would be ideal, I think. Which speaks to number 3. Also, when you're working together, you can reduce risk by building security into the network more comprehensively, a more secure network by its very nature. Number 3, accelerated response to security events. So you're able to see the event quickly, mitigate it more quickly when these 2 teams are working together. And then it's cheaper. These guys working together, they're spending less time on problems that both of them need to work on. They're spending less on tools if they can share tools, integrate tools. So there's an OpEx efficiency gain. And then in terms of critical points of collaboration, number 1 is they obviously, as I've described, they collaborate on troubleshooting and incident response, but they're also collaborating on operational monitoring, so they have more situational awareness when they're working together. And then these 2 are really important. Number 3, infrastructure design and implementation, top area of collaboration for 30% of them. So they're building a more secure network together than bolting security on top of something the network team built independently, and vice versa. And technology evaluation and procurement, they're buying stuff together. They're figuring out what to buy before they even design the network. They're like, okay, let's build a microservices fabric. Let's build an overlay that micro segments our data center. Well, it'd be good if the network team and the security team were working together on that and picking out what technology to use. You see some enterprises where like the network team and security team have, their network team builds out like a new data center network fabric using one vendor, and then the security team comes in with an overlay vendor to implement their own microsegmentation on top of it. There's a lot of redundant work there. Top challenges to this collaboration. At the top of the list, there's 5 things that are kind of pop out as most common. The network team, the security team have different goals. The network team is trying to connect people. The security team is trying to limit that connectivity to mitigate risk. So there's going to need to be some leadership there to figure out how those goals can be aligned. And I think that these teams are ready to have that alignment. I mean, you look at things like zero trust infrastructure, for instance, is a really good area of collaboration for these 2 groups to sort of figure out how they can connect things securely, but also simply, so the end user has a good experience. Zero trust networking technologies have that potential. Cross-team skills gap and a lack of collaboration workflows within individual tools or collaboration opportunities with individual tools that these groups are using are common issues. And then conflicts about sharing data and owning data. Like, I'm collecting this data with my tool and you can't look at it. You're not messing with it because you'll ruin the quality of the data, or you'll expose it to someone that shouldn't see it. And then shared data that is inconsistent, or are out of date, irrelevant. So data issues are a problem. And then in the middle of the pack, you see a lack of defined processes for that collaboration. Defined processes are best practices. That one is exacerbated for enterprises who told us that they're projecting very high traffic growth over the next 2 years, over the next 12 months. Those guys were more likely to be telling us they're struggling with poorly defined processes and best practices. So a saturation of traffic on the network is exposing bad practices, bad processes for collaboration. Successful NetOps teams told us they are most likely to be struggling with skills gaps. So they're really good at NetOps, but they're struggling to apply that to SecOps collaboration. So that's something that they need to work on. Megatrend number 2, the data center SDN world. 10 years ago, this is OpenFlow, and OpenFlow didn't happen. First generation SDN technology did not win over the networking world for a variety of reasons. You know, one being that separation of the data plane from the controller plane, centralizing the control plane was often not scalable in a lot of use cases, and people just didn't feel comfortable with it. OpenFlow, the protocol that enabled that centralized control plane never really caught on in one great adoption. Most of the startups that first championed it started downplaying it after a while and have since exited the market in a variety of ways. And what we saw emerge in its place were second generation solutions that use the SDN terminology but are really not SDN as was originally promulgated to the networking world. Instead, it's a combination of technologies like network virtualization, policy-based controllers, automation tools, observability and analytics that allow enterprises to build networks that are easier to manage from day 0 to day 2. So you see things like Cisco ACI and VMware NSX, and if someone from the SDN startup world 10 years ago looked at what Cisco ACI and VMware NSX were, they would say, this is not SDN, but it is the SDN that we have. So where are people with those technologies? 25% told us that they have widely deployed some sort of SDN technology in their data center today. 30% are more at the pilot stage. It's like deployed in a pocket somewhere. And then 34% said, we have no plans to do this ever. And then single digit numbers were researching and evaluating and trying to pick out a vendor. How does it impact the network management tool world, which is the focus of this research? More than half said that they need new data collection techniques and protocols, like new API integration between their management tool and their SDN fabric. And nearly half of them said one of the biggest things is we need new visualizations and dashboard views for things like SDN abstractions. And I also need advanced analytics and AIOps technology for anomaly detection and traffic optimization. Those are the big three. You also see a lot of interest in the ability to make automated SDN configuration changes, not necessarily just pushing the buttons, but making it more integrated with monitoring tools or something to drive automated change a little bit more. And then automated IP address management and DNS operations, also big in a dynamic SDN fabric. So integration with something that provides DDI operations tools. Best practices requirements, those that are most successful with network ops in general, told us that new AIOps features and automated SDN config changes were their biggest tool requirements for their SDN implementation. Megatrend number 3, IoT, the Internet of Things, driving partnerships with the OT group in your enterprise. The OT group being whoever owns HVAC or medical instruments or manufacturing systems. You know who I'm talking about. 74% of the 350 enterprises represented in the study told us that they have so-called IoT devices connecting to their corporate networks. 53% of them said that this had led to a close partnership between the networking team and the operational technology team, which is good. Those close partnerships were more in common in Europe. 1/3 said they're only collaborating on an ad hoc basis. 12% said these groups don't work together at all, which is problematic. And that question was only posed to the 74% who are seeing the IoT devices connect, not the others. And the 39% of respondents told us that they have become at least partially responsible for IoT device administration. So updating and patching operation OSs on something like a MRI machine. Can you imagine? That's scary. So NetOps teams are being pulled and stretched by IoT, and it's something that requires further analysis. If any vendors out there want to sponsor a whole research project devoted to that one subject, I'd be happy to talk to you. What kind of networking investments are driven by the Internet of Things on the corporate network? Well, number one, security. Network security investment is huge. I mean, they're just, these devices are often unmanaged. I mean, if the network team is being asked to patch the OS on a MRI machine, I'd like to invest in more network security. And then NAC and authentication and network availability and performance monitoring become more important investments. And then Wi-Fi infrastructure is something that's being driven as a tertiary requirement, and also network segmentation technology, which harkens back to those OSs on the IoT devices. And you see lesser investment in other core infrastructure like Ethernet and routing and DDI management. All right, megatrend number 4, streaming telemetry, poised to enrich network monitoring. Now, streaming network telemetry is a concept that's been emerging over the last few years, and you're seeing a lot of vendors start to support it. It's the notion that you can, instead of pulling metrics from your infrastructure, those metrics are streaming to whatever tool subscribes to the stream. There are a variety of mechanisms for enabling that, like NetConf-based technology, for instance, gRPC-based technology. And instead of relying on a protocol like Simple Network Management Protocol to pull the data or to configure traps on your switches to send events to your network monitoring tool streams all the data it needs to maintain a much more granular and efficient view of the network. And this is very interesting, and 71% of enterprises say they're interested in it. 23% said no. So definitely something that's driving a lot of interest. We asked these people, do you see, because we've heard people like Google say, we're going to get rid of SNMP on our network. We're going to rely on streaming telemetry to give us all the insight we need into our infrastructure and what's happening on our network, because SNMP is a terrible protocol. So we asked these guys, do you want to get rid of SNMP by using something like streaming telemetry? 69% said no. We're going to use these things together because we think that streaming telemetry will give us a deeper view of what's happening. SNMP still has a role to play. 1/4 said that they see this as an opportunity to replace SNMP. So what are the primary reasons why these guys are looking at streaming telemetry or interested in it? It's a more efficient way to transfer data from your infrastructure to your tools, which means reduce load on the network, and also just more efficient transfer means you're getting probably more of the data you need to see what's happening. Reduced security risk associated with data collection. Some people have complained for a long time that SNMP is not a secure way of collecting data off your network. The most recent version of it is secure if the security is enabled, but there's still a lot of people out there who just feel like it's not a secure way to collect your data. So that's a big driver. And also reliable data collection. The streaming telemetry is less likely to push errors to your tools, errors in data generation and collection. It's easier, you don't have to worry about MIB implementations and stuff like that. The data that's coming is more reliable. And then of less interest, the extensibility of streaming telemetry, the ability to collect more kinds of statistics and metrics from your switches and routers and so forth. Data standardization, not very interesting to them. And this one is surprising, more granular data collection. I thought that would be a bigger opportunity, but it's at the bottom of the list. So that is the end of my presentation. I just want to urge you, if you have the time and money, to read the full report. It has 70 charts and more than 65 pages of analysis and insight into some of the topics we covered, all the topics covered here, and more. For instance, we looked at plans around 400 gigabit Ethernet investment, which is on the horizon. We looked at organizational strategies. Should the network operations team have an independent network operations center, or should they be forming a cross-domain ops team or something else? More on network management product features and requirements, and also Wi-Fi management strategies. We asked them a lot of questions about how they're organizing Wi-Fi management, what sort of capabilities they need in their tools and things like that. Excuse me. And also how Wi-Fi is used. Is it, do you have a Wi-Fi only campus? Are you still mostly relying on wire connections, things like that? So there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. So please consider taking a look at it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Raleigh for the Q&A session.
Great. Thank you, Seamus. The first question I'll go ahead and answer. Someone wanted to know, will they get the link to the recording? And yes, you will. I will be sending out an email later today that will include the link to the on-demand playback, as well as a link to the report so you can learn more. Seamus, I'm going to jump into the other questions. The first one is, did you ask how many network problems are caused by manual errors?
Yeah, that's a stat that people love to throw around, and I've seen a lot of different analyst firms answer that question, ask that question in research. We did ask that question, and about a quarter of overall network problems were identified, on average, were as the result of a manual error from like configuring a device in CLI or something.
Thanks, Seamus. The next question is, do you think more companies should be using packet brokers?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a line item on your budget that maybe you don't have, so it's hard to just say you should be using it if you don't have the budget for it, because some of them can be expensive. I think they've become less expensive in a lot of ways in recent years as some vendors have started using open hardware with software. Network backup brokers is like a hardware appliance. Definitely have a role to play in backup-based monitoring, especially if you have a lot of tools in your operational monitoring tool set, your security tool set, and your compliance tool set that need access to the same data. Also, if you need to collect data from a lot of different points on your network, it can be really helpful to aggregate. And there's a lot of grooming technologies, where you can make sure the right flows of packets are sent to the right tool. So a lot of people will benefit from a network packet broker, and maybe you have some tools where you just want to use distributed probes. But yeah, I think it's really going to depend on your tool set and the network architecture and your budget. But I think anyone would benefit from it if they can afford it. Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you. Can you also address what Wi-Fi management information is in the full report?
Sure. So we asked them a question on what sort of capabilities are most important to you for like Wi-Fi performance management. We also asked them questions about how do you do RF management, so radio frequency management, like what kinds of radio frequency capabilities are important to you. I'm not what are you doing in terms of getting RF visibility? Are you using dedicated sensors? Are you using integrated capabilities in your Wi-Fi access points? Are you using handheld Wi-Fi RF measurement stuff? And then we ask some questions like, do you have a unified Wi-Fi operations team that's like basically you have a team that manages both wired and wireless, or do you have separate teams, and like which approach is working better overall? And we ask them like what generation of Wi-Fi technology is most prevalent on their network. And as I mentioned, like we also ask them like how much does your enterprise rely on Wi-Fi versus wired connections?
Great, thank you for answering that question. We have answered all the questions that have come in, so that will conclude today's event. I hope that you will check out the follow-up email from EMA later today, and I hope that we'll see you at a future webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.